What's going on, everybody? It's Venom here, and today we're going to be talking about the water type. So first and foremost, I should probably get out my credentials. But first I'm going to premise this video with saying that this is non-scripted, and so I'm going to just be free talking and going as I go. So some of this may be a little bit confusing, but I'm going to do my best to summarize this as best as possible because I do in fact love the water type. So the water type is one of the 18 types. It's one of my favorite personal types, and it's definitely one of the better types, if not the best type. In this particular video, we're going to be going over the basics of the water type and several significant water type Pokemon that have basically taken over the meta, starting from Generation 1 all the way up to Generation 7. Now, I'm not going to be going over Pokemon with Swift Swim or weather-dependent abilities, such as Politoed and Kyogre, because those Pokemon require their own special video, so you can request that next if that's what we want to work on. So the first thing I'm going to go over are some statistical averages. So for HP, I believe HP stat is about 69.56, attack is 73.88, defense is 75.41, special attack is 74.04, special defense is 72.22, speed is 63.46, averaging at a total of 428.57, and yes, that took a while to memorize. That's basically overall. If we're going over fully evolved Pokemon, the statistics are 83.16 for HP, 88.97 for attack, 89.99 for defense, 88.92 for special attack, 87.46 for special defense, and 70.53 for speed, averaging at a total of 509.09 total. Next, we're going to be going over the type, basically the type advantages. Basically, water is super effective against the three types, fire, ground, and rock. It's not very effective against the following three types, dragon, grass, and water. And defensively, it resists fire, ice, steel, and water, while being weak to electric and grass. So, the water type, honestly, is probably the best type at the moment. It's debatable, but right now we're going to be going over some of the water type Pokemon. Particularly, let's start with, you know what? Let's start with Cloyster. So Cloyster, honestly, one of the better Pokemon. In Generation 1, it basically used Clamp as a wrap-like attack and then exploded. It basically also switched out on Pokemon that are like Tauros, where it could basically wall them defensively. And it used Blizzard, Clamp, Hyper Beam, and Explosion as its common set. So that's pretty much the gist of Cloyster. Next Pokemon we have is Lapras. There are a few water types that I'm not going to be going over simply because they're not very relevant. But for the most part, we're going to be going over the most important and relevant water type Pokemon in the tier. So for Lapras, typically Lapras ran Blizzard and Thunderbolt, giving it the combo of electricity and ice. And basically, Confuse Ray and Body Slam as well, basically allowing it to be a good para-flincher. It has a very high HP stat, making Lapras one of the better water-type Pokemon of Generation 1. It's a very useful Pokemon due to its variety of attacks and balanced stats, and its defense and HP being higher than most water-type Pokemon. While the speed being slow, it does still allow it to outspeed Pokemon such as Exeggutor and Rhydon. Now, as we move on to the list here, we have Starmie. Starmie is definitely one of the better Pokemon of the Generation 1. Access to both Recover and the Psychic typing, and definitely the synonyms of success in Red, Blue, and Yellow. But basically, the standard set for Starmie back in these times was Blizzard, Thunderbolt, Recover, and Thunder Wave. So you really didn't see too much water offensively. However, you did see waters being used very commonly in the OU tier. And next we're going to be going over the most common water type, which is Slowbro. And so Slowbro, as far as I can remember, Slowbro definitely was one of the more relevant types. Alright, Slowbro. So Slowbro, basically, Amnesia made it one of the strongest Pokemon in the tier, basically allowing it to boost its special defense and special attack up 2 stages. The typical set seen being used for it is Amnesia, Surf, Thunder Wave, and Rest, basically able to tank as much damage as possible, paralyzing opponents and being able to hit them super effectively with Surf. But for the most part, that's all that you saw for the water type Pokemon in Red, Blue, and Yellow. So moving on, we have the Gold and Silver. Gold and Silver. So Suicune, definitely a very good defensive tank. It had no physical weaknesses and only one actual special weakness, Electricity, barring that grass wasn't very common. And it also was able to abuse Roar to shuffle out Pokemon and basically get the game starting. Suicune was definitely one of the better Pokemon for things such as Spike support, and its typical set used was Surf, Toxic, Roar, and Rest. It's not really a complicated Pokemon, but it's definitely one of the more bulkier types in the tier. Other common sets include Surf, Sleep Talk, Ice Beam, and Rest, which allow it to basically be offensively orientated. Now, moving on, another good example of a Generation 2 water type are the ones that we already mentioned, but I would like to rather move on to Generation 3, and we're going to be moving on to Swampert. So Swampert, definitely a really solid choice in Sapphire and Ruby, of course. Typically, the standard set includes Earthquake, Ice Beam, Hydro Pump, and Protect. However, Hydro Pump can be swapped out with Surf, Toxic, or Curse, whereas Protect is commonly swapped out with Roar. The defensive investments indicated it ran a strong, bulky defensive typing, basically with the Water Ground being a very unique typing, only weak to Grass. Swampert only is weak to Grass, but it basically has the immunity to Electricity, making it one of the more relevant water types in the tier, making it one of the most feared types. It's definitely one of the most important Pokemon in the in the Sapphire and Ruby metagame. It basically also has the ability to wall several different types of types, whereas only taking super effective against Grass. I already mentioned that. Let's go over Vaporeon, because Vaporeon was also seen a bit in Ruby Sapphire. Typically, Vaporeon ran the Surf, Substitute, Wish, and Baton Pass set. Vaporeon was useful because of its water immunity, as well as having a very high special attack and HP stat, able to pass off wishes to very important Pokemon. With Haze and Water Absorb, it made it one of the best Suicune counters in the game, and since Suicune was very prominent, it was actually one of the better choices. It also had access to Acid Armor, making it a really good Pokemon to use Baton Pass with. Another common set was the Wall set for Vaporeon, which used Surf, Wish, Protect, Toxic, and Ice Beam, sometimes switching out Toxic for Ice Beam if necessary. As a phaser, it ran the common set of Surf, Haze, Wish, and Ice Beam. But sometimes it opted for Protect over Ice Beam if the case was needed. And additionally, the last Baton Pass support set was Acid Armor, Baton Pass, Roar, Substitute, or Wish. Now, moving on to Generation... Oh, excuse me, we didn't cover Milotic. And we didn't cover Kingdra. Bad Venom. Let's go over Kingdra just a little bit. So, Kingdra wasn't actually used too much, but the set that was used was Rain Dance with Surf or Hydro Pump or Ice Beam with conjunction of Hidden Power Electric or Toxic. This was one of the more common sets since it abused Swift Swim. It did have access to a set of Dragon Dance and Flail, running Substitute, Flail, Dragon Dance, and Hydro Pump, but the problem with this was that since Hydro Pump was a special attack, it didn't actually gain the bonus from the Berry boost. Now going over its Gold and Silver set, it typically ran Surf, Double Edge, Sleep Talk, and Rest, but it really wasn't that good in the metagame, and therefore isn't really going to be covered as much. Going over Milotic, however, is a very strong Pokemon. It has access to Recover, one of the better moves for Water-type Pokemon. Very few Pokemon of the Water-type have access to Recovery in the form of Recover. A few notable examples that come to mind are Starmie and Gastrodon, which we will be going over shortly. But Milotic overall had a very strong niche in the competitive format. Due to its ability Marvel Scale, basically getting status allowed it to have a higher defensive stat, and it overall made it one of the better, great, bulky water-type Pokemon. Had access to moves such as Surf, Recover, Ice Beam, and typically opted for Hypnosis or Toxic, depending on what your team needed. Additionally, it could run the Restox set, being able to abuse the defensive boost that is gained through its ability Marvel Scale. Has access to Rest, Sleep Talk, Surf, and sometimes opted to use Toxic or Ice Beam in that particular slot. Moving on to Generation 4, personally my favorite generation, we do have to go over several different of the Water-type Pokemon. The first one I guess we can go over is Empoleon. Empoleon, alright. Well, you know what? I didn't do Gyarados, so we should probably do Gyarados first. So, we're not going to be going over the red and blue Gyarados set, but we will be going over the set for the Gyarados in gold and, in Sapphire and Ruby. So, Gyarados abused the set of Dragon Dance, Taunt, and Earthquake while using Hidden Power Rock or Hidden Power Flying as his last move. Being able to get a stab bonus is always very beneficial. But Gyarados is definitely something that should be watched out for, because unlike Salamence and Tyranitar, it has no problems with water types or the move Ice Beam, in the case of Salamence having very much difficulty with that. But Salamence is something we can go over in the future. So it couldn't even run a special set with Thunder, Hydro Pump, Hidden Power Flying, or Blizzard and Ice Beam, but those weren't typically seen too much. A Choice Banded set was also abused commonly with Double Edge, Hidden Power Flying, Earthquake, Hydro Pump, or Fire Blast. Going over to Generation 4, we'll cover Gyarados because Gyarados is definitely one of the bigger threats in Generation 4, and I'll be going over more of the Sun and Moon more than anything else because Sun and Moon is currently the most relevant, but some of these are important for history's sake. So going over Diamond and Pearl for Gyarados. Gyarados, honestly, Diamond and Pearl was particularly the best metagame and probably the one I'm the most experienced in. Growing up, playing competitively, Generation 4 in particular was honestly one of the best times for Pokemon. And especially Gyarados. So with Gyarados having a base stat of 125 attack and a very diverse move pool, it made it one of the top sweepers in the metagame. It only had a weakness to Rock and Electric, so it did have to watch out for Stealth Rocks though. But the common set used for it was Dragon Dance, Waterfall, Stone Edge, and Earthquake, typically running Life Orb or Leftovers as a side item for it. There were a few other sets such as Taunt Dragon Dance, but for the most part Gyarados was straightforward in the fact that it just set up a Dragon Dance and basically wrecked your team. If you weren't carrying common Scarfers, there really was not much in the metagame that could take a +2 hit from Gyarados in the form of Stone Edge, Earthquake, or Waterfall. Needless to say, its ability also came in huge use, being able to completely stomp over Pokemon that basically require physical attack, switching into the very common Pokemon Heatran and very common Pokemon Scizor, definitely coming in huge use. Another one of the most commonly used water-type Pokemon is, once again, we're going to be going over the past Pokemon here that I deliberately, accidentally closed out. Lapras is not going to be talked about anymore simply because Lapras had no more usage past Generation 1 and 2, but we will be going over Pokemon such as Starmie. Now, Starmie is a really awesome Pokemon. Has access to the move Rapid Spin, making it one of the more relevant water types in the tier. In particular, 4th Gen was a very good generation for Starmie. It abused the set of Hydro Pump, Thunderbolt, Ice Beam, and typically ran Rapid Spin as its last set, running max investment in speed and special attack with a combination of Life Orb. However, my personal favorite set is the bulky Starmie set, which indicates of a Rapid Spin, Surf, Recover, or Ice Beam, or Thunderbolt for its last slot. And it opted to run max HP and max speed. The reason why I found this the most useful is because it basically allowed it to come in on very common Pokemon such as Infernape, but you do have to be careful for Pokemon such as Rotom. Rotom was a very huge threat in Generation 4 and is not something that should be messed with. So going back to Suicune. Suicune in Generation 4, definitely one of the most feared threats in the meta. It had access to Calm Mind and typically used Hydro Pump with Hidden Power Electric and Ice Beam on the side of it, being able to basically mow down the entire tier with its coverage. It typically used leftovers or life orb, depending on what you needed to use. But there was also a very common set known as the Crocun set. This is personally one of my favorite sets of Surf, Calm Mind, Rest, and Sleep Talk, basically running max HP and max defense for optimal survivability, making it one of the better threats in the tier. Additionally, Suicune had really good bulk and defensive stats, being able to commonly come in on Pokemon that weren't Zapdos. But you know what else was a really good Pokemon in OU? Slowbro. Slowbro wasn't an OU Pokemon in Diamond and Pearl, unfortunately, but it did have a lot of usage. And going back to Slowbro, I should probably cover the past few generations of Slowbro, but we're going to be going over that in another separate video, as today is just talking about the threats of Water-type Pokemon. So Slowbro had access to Slack Off, Surf, Ice Beam, and Thunder Wave, basically making it one of the best counters to Dragon Dance Gyarados and Dragonite as well. Since it has access to Slack Off, it made it a much better choice over Pokemon such as Suicune, who had to rely on the move Rest. Surf, giving Slowbro a reliable stab to work with in its slot, basically allowed it to kill Pokemon that were weak to water, of course. Ice Beam was another very commonly ran move with Slowbro. However, some people, including myself, opted to use Psychic instead, allowing it to OHKO Pokemon that really were weak to Psychic and really didn't take much from Surf or Ice Beam, including other water-type Pokemon. So, moving on to I believe we're on Generation 5 now. We're not going to be going over Politoed, as I did mention the problem with Politoed. Oh, we didn't go over Empoleon. My apologies. Empoleon. So, Empoleon, unfortunately, is very slow. Its coverage is pretty bad. But what makes Empoleon very unique is, number one, that it's actually the most relevant starter Pokemon in its time. We're not going over Greninja right now. But it has 1 immunity and 11 resistances to Ice, Dragon, Ghost, Rock, Water, and Dark, which are the most common attacking types known to the meta. The most common Empoleon set was the Subpataya set. Subpataya was one of Empoleon's best sets, being able to use Agility, Substitute, Surf, and Ice Beam, typically running a max speed, max special attack variant. The Pataya Berry allowed it to get up in Agility, get hit by something, and substitute down to the point where it was getting a +1. And because of its ability Tauren, it was able to get a nice special attack boost, which allowed it to clean house on the entire metagame. Surf is the primary stab attack for Empoleon, and it OHKOs Heatran and 2-hit KOs Metagross, which is very relevant. Because of the Pataya Berry boost, people don't really want to run Hydro Pump, though I have seen a few people personally use it, and I would like to say it's not the worst. Now, we're going to be going over Generation 5. So, Gastrodon. Gastrodon got a very nice buff. Water-type Pokemon, and Rain in particular, was very abused in Generation 5, so Gastrodon became one of the most reliable counters to Water-type. Its ability Storm Drain basically allowed it to be granted a special attack immunity from common moves such as Surf, Hydro Pump, Scald, and allowed it to get a special attack boost in return every time it was hit by a Water-type move. The defensive typing that it has access to allows it, once again, like Swampert, to be immune to common Pokemon that abuse electric typing. Although Gastrodon has really good qualities, it's by no means a really good Pokemon, simply because its stats are not the greatest. The common set that was abused is Earthquake, Scald, Toxic, and Recover, and Scald is something that deserves its own mention. Scald has a 30% chance to burn any opponent, regardless of whether or not you think it should happen. It's essentially basically a game changer attack, and honestly it's what shaped the meta for water type Pokemon in particular to be as good as they are today. But Gastrodon, definitely one of the better water choices in the metagame. Moving over to the next good choice in Generation 5, we have Jellicent. Jellicent was an amazing Pokemon in Generation 5, being able to use Will-O-Wisp, Taunt, Scald, and Recover as its main primary attacks, running typically using max bulk and max defense. And by bulk, I mean HP, of course. Sorry. Because it's a ghost type, it actually had an immunity to Jirachi's Body Slam, making it one of the better switch-ins for Jirachi. Basically, since Jellicent is more of a special wall, having Scald really helped it out because it was able to tank things more on the physical side. Pokemon that are basically relying on recovery moves such as Slowbro, Blissey, Vaporeon, Quagsire, and Hippowdon were pretty much shut down by Jellicent completely. Jellicent was also a ghost type, being able to switch into common rapid spinners and being able to block their rapid spin entirely. So Jellicent, definitely one of the better water type Pokemon. We're going to be going over the next water type Pokemon, which I believe to be, yeah, let's go over Keldeo right now. So Keldeo, one of the awesomest, probably best water type Pokemons in Generation 5. Typically it used Life Orb with Hydro Pump, Secret Sword, Hidden Power, and Icy Wind. The Hidden Power really depended on what your team needed. It typically used Hidden Power Bug to handle particular Pokemon such as Celebi, and hitting a few Psychic type Pokemon like Latios, but ultimately its primary function was to hit Starmie, I believe, as far as what I'm concerned. Keldeo is honestly, it's a really good design too, but it really has a good speed stat and a really good special attack stat. With Secret Sword, it basically stomps Chansey and Blissey, which were definitely huge mons that were very relevant in the tier. And being able to basically OHKO, I would say Keldeo was able to OHKO about 75% of the tier if it had a Specs and was powered up in Rain. With its Water Stab, of course. Anything that didn't resist it was probably going to get OHKO'd unless it was, of course, Chansey or Blissey. Next water Pokemon we're going to be going over in Generation 5 is Rotom Wash. Rotom Wash, a huge partner, and it got a huge buff as well. So it typically abused Volt Switch, Hydro Pump, Will-O-Wisp, and Pain Split, while commonly using Hidden Power Ice. But what made Rotom different from the others is that it had an immunity to ground, and it didn't have a weakness to electricity. So similarly to Gastrodon and Swampert, but it didn't have an immunity to it, but it just didn't have a weakness to it. It was only weak to grass again. Basically, grass Pokemon weren't that good. And I can go over grass Pokemon and the grass Pokemon relevant in the tier in another video. But Rotom in particular was very good at stopping common threats such as Garchomp, Gliscor, and Thundurus Therian. Although you could stop Pokemon such as Breloom with Will-O-Wisp because you had enough speed to basically abuse them. So Will-O-Wisp is really good for Pokemon such as Ferrothorn, Dragonite, and Abomasnow. Scizor and Breloom were also really good choices that Will-O-Wisp handled very well. So for Kingdra, I'm not going to be going over Kingdra because, like I said, I really didn't want to go over Swift Swimmers in this video. I think I did go over him by mistake, but we're going to be moving on to I believe we're on Generation 6 now. Alright, so Azumarill. We're on XY now. Okay, so Azumarill. Azumarill, honestly, with the new Fairy typing, basically made it one of the highest feared water type Pokemon in the tier, being able to abuse Play Rough, Waterfall, Aqua Jet, and Superpower, and commonly also using the newly buffed Knockoff. With its ability Huge Power, it had a huge attack stat, and really did use the Choice Banded item with access to priority via Aqua Jet. It was able to OHKO a lot of different Pokemon. Now, the great part about Azumarill is that it was actually immune to Dragon, and with Play Rough and Waterfall, it is incredibly hard to switch into. Magnezone and Skarmory basically also took a lot of damage from Superpower, so they also had to be careful, but they did take a lot of damage from Waterfall as well. But Azumarill doesn't come without its flaws. It's a very particularly slow Pokemon. Another commonly set ran on it is the Belly Drum set, and I know that I had to go over this, otherwise people would be like, hey, you didn't go over the Belly Drum set. But Belly Drum Azumarill definitely a huge problem for lots of Pokemon in the tier. Belly Drum allowed it to basically get up a +6 while having half of its HP, but it did use the Citrus Berry to recover a good portion of its hit points. We're not going to be going over too much about Azumarill and the Belly Drum set, mostly because the Choice Banded set was preferred, as the Belly Drum set had its niche, but it didn't really work as well as the Choice Banded set, in my personal opinion. The Belly Drum set typically used Aqua Jet, Play Rough, and Knockoff as a partner to its moves. So we're going to be going over Volcanion now. And Volcanion was very interesting because it's the first fire and water type Pokemon in the tier. Or in the game, excuse me, not even in just competitive play. It really commonly used Steam Eruption, which was a new move that was introduced specifically for Volcanion, which allows it to get burned similarly to Scald, but it's a much stronger based power move. It also had access to Fire Blast and Sludge Bomb, while also commonly using Earth Power. The most common set was Choice Scarf, giving it a speed boost, but another commonly used set is the Choice Spec set, where it'd be used Steam Eruption, Fire Blast, Hidden Power Electric, and Sludge Wave. And of course, being a Fire-type Pokemon gives it access to demolishing different Grass-type Pokemon that would typically switch into your common Water. So, Water Pokemon, really good so far. Now we're going to be going over Manaphy, because Manaphy was a little bit used in the X and Y format. Alright, Manaphy. Tail Glow, an amazing attack. Tail Glow is what separated Manaphy from the other Water-type Pokemon. Manaphy was really, really relevant, especially in X and Y, being able to get a +3 special attack boost, having a really decent speed stat of 100 as well, being able to outspeed many common threats, but it typically used Scald, Ice Beam, and Energy Ball as its offensive pressure, but it did have access to Hidden Power Fire and Psychic for other options, being able to hit past things such as Ferrothorn. But it did need Ice Beam for things such as Amoonguss, Celebi, Mega Altaria, and Latios. Now, going past Manaphy, we're going to be going over Greninja. And Greninja, honestly, very scary mon indeed. So scary that it was actually banned in X and Y. So, I don't typically go over Ubers, but I will go over Greninja. Basically, Greninja was a suicide lead in the Ubers format. It ran Spikes, Toxic Spikes, Taunt, and Shadow Sneak, basically to set up its hazards and then to go down and die. I believe it ran Shadow Sneak to allow it to be a ghost type to block things that used Rapid Spin, which honestly makes sense to me. But that's pretty much all from Greninja as far as that is concerned. I did want to go over Blastoise though, because I know Mega Blastoise wasn't particularly great, but it's still a relevant Pokemon being the Water type. It commonly used Rapid Spin, Scald, Ice Beam, and Aura Sphere, being able to abuse its ability Mega Launcher, which gives it a bonus to its Pulse moves, if I recall correctly. Yes, to its Pulse moves. I think it also gave it a bonus to Aura Sphere, if I recall correctly. But what was great about Mega Blastoise was that it was an offensive spinner, and you don't really see too many offensive water spinners. The only other one being Starmie that I can recall right now as of this moment. But Starmie is either run as a bulky spinner or a offensively based fast spinner. And with Blastoise, you can still run max special attack and still be a very bulky but hard-hitting Blastoise at the same time. So next we're going to be talking about Sharpedo. Sharpedo, honestly, one of the greatest, coolest looking megas for the water types. It wasn't really used too much in OU, but with its ability speed boost, it gave it a very relevant status, being able to pull off a +1 speed stat while protecting, and having access to the dark type really did help it offensively. Although it wasn't used as much because in X and Y there were a lot of fairies running around, it still had access to Ice Fang and Poison Jab, as well as Hydro Pump and other water stabs, which gave it access to demolishing majority of the metagame, but it did have to watch out for things such as Talonflame. Alright, so I think we covered most of the relevancies. I did want to go over Quagsire a little bit though before we hopped into Sun and Moon in our current meta, which I can talk about just a little bit more because I know Sun and Moon is definitely a lot more relevant. So, what I found great about Quagsire is its ability to be it could switch into things that were set up, and they would be like, the game's over, man. But you would be like, well, I have this Quagsire, right? And it has a very good ability called Unaware. And Unaware allowed it to be immune to any stat changes. So if you're like, sitting in the back with your +6, let's say your +6 Salamence, and you're like, well, this game is over, I have a +6 Salamence. Then you go into your Quagsire and you're like, well, dude, guess what? I have a Quagsire. And you can Scald Burn it, you can Toxic it, and you can just keep mashing Recover, Ice Beam. You have lots of options. So that was what was good about Quagsire. It didn't have a really good stat as far as anything. I mean, it had a pretty decent HP stat overall. I believe it tied in the BL4 tier, which is pretty low in X and Y, but I did figure it was a notable mention considering it had one of the most unique abilities, being able to shut down Pokemon that were setup sweepers. Now, we're going to be going over the Generation 7, which I can talk about a little bit more. We're not going to be going over Pelipper, because like I said, Pelipper is a Drizzle Pokemon, and so we can go over Drizzle water types in the next video. But we will be going over the few relevant water types in today's metagame, the Sun and Moon metagame. So, Greninja, one of the best Pokemon with its speed tier, and the best ability in the game, arguably of course, Protein. Protein allowed it to change its type with whatever type of attack it was using at the time. And its most commonly abused set, I should say, is its Scarf set, believe it or not. It used Rock Slide, U-Turn, Ice Beam, and Spikes or Low Kick as its offensive pressure. And was able to commonly switch into things such as Volcarona and Gyarados to eliminate them from the field, because they commonly would set up Quiver Dances or Dragon Dance, and you would switch into your Greninja, and they'd be like, well, why did you do that? I'm faster, and I'm just going to kill you. And then you would hit them with Rock Slide and actually knock them out, and they'd be like, well, that sucks. But another commonly used abused set for Greninja is the Spikes Toxic Spikes lead set with the Focus Sash. Very common. My personal favorite for Greninja is the Spike set with Hydro Pump, Dark Pulse, and Ice Beam using the Life Orb as a very good common lead. And what was really good about Greninja at the time, and what's still really good about Greninja, is that it's able to kill Landorus Therian and Heatran and Tyranitar, being one of the more common Pokemon of Sun and Moon. I know Tyranitar isn't very common, but it has been growing in usage. So that's really all I have to say about Protein Greninja. Definitely one of the hugest threats in the Sun and Moon metagame with its special speed stat, its very good speed stat, and its very high special attack. Going over Greninja Ash was an entirely different monster, but what made Greninja Ash good is that it could use Choice Specs with Hydro Pump, Dark Pulse, and Water Shuriken giving it a priority. Now, what was interesting about Greninja is that when you knock out a Pokemon with Battle Bond, you get your Battle Bond bonus, which allows you to use your Water Shuriken to hit 5 times. And because when you're in a Battle Bonded Greninja form, you have such a high speed stat that there's really nothing that's going to be outspeeding you. And if you're using Choice Specs, you're going to be hitting, I would honestly say that you're going to be knocking out about 60% of the metagame with a Battle Bonded Greninja just with Specs alone. Because Hydro Pump and Dark Pulse gives you near perfect coverage aside from hitting things like Tapu Fini and Chansey, but for the most part you're going to be smashing through a great majority of Pokemon. Oh, and Bulu. I forgot about Bulu. Moving on, we do have 2 more mentions in the Sun and Moon format. We do have Tapu Fini. Tapu Fini, one of my favorite water types. I know I keep saying that, but Tapu Fini is probably my favorite water type in the overused tier. We're only going to be going over singles in this video because it's already getting pretty long, but hopefully in my future videos I'll be getting better at narrating in general, and I'll probably have a script prepared because honestly this is very unorganized. But Tapu Fini. So Tapu Fini typically used max HP, max speed with Taunt, Nature's Madness, Moonblast, and Defog. Tapu Fini brought a new ability to the table called Misty Terrain. With Misty Terrain up, it basically blocks status and lowers the damage of Dragon-type Dragon-type moves. Now, this doesn't really sound important as Tapu Fini is a Fairy type, but you could switch it in on other Pokemon that were weak to a Dragon and they would be taking less damage. Now, what was great about Tapu Fini is that with its Water Fairy status, it is the only Water Fairy in the game that is currently relevant, and it has access to Nature's Madness, being able to reduce any Pokemon's HP to half. Another commonly used Tapu Fini set is Max HP, Max Defense, which is what I prefer to use, and I do like to use Hydro Pump or Surf with Moonblast. Being able to hit Pokemon offensively is very important, especially things such as Heatran, which commonly believe they can wall you, which is not true. Another thing that makes Tapu Fini one of the best waters in the game is access to Defog, which removes all entry hazards on the field. Now, our last Pokemon we're going to be going over is Toxapex. Toxapex, not much to say about this little guy other than he's very, very annoying. Toxapex has the ability Regenerator, meaning that every time it switches out, it recovers 33% of its health. I believe it's 33. I might add a caption if that's incorrect, but again, we're going off the top of our heads here. With its moves Scald, Haze, Recover, and Toxic Spikes, it became a very relevant special wall, being able to come in on very common threats, particularly things such as Gyarados and Charizard X, because it had the access to Haze, and it was able to shut down other Pokemon such as Zapdos and Latios, believe it or not, because it did have access to Toxic, depending on how you swapped it in. What was great about Toxapex too is that it shared a similar role as Tentacruel, and Tentacruel was a Pokemon that I completely forgot to go over, but it's going to be covered in my Swift Swim / Drizzle video, simply because it did use Rain Dish, and I do believe that Tentacruel deserves its own particular video. But, Toxapex had one of the highest defensive and specially defensive stats, making it a fantastic wall in today's metagame. It does have to watch out for common things such as Tapu Lele and Tapu Koko, but it definitely is one of the best water types that you will commonly see in Generation 7. So I hope this kind of helped you. I just summarized 26 different water type Pokemon. And that's going to be it for today. I'm going to be learning and improving, but hopefully this water type video was helpful to you. Personally, water type is the strongest type right now, in my personal opinion, and honestly, you should always have at least one water type on your team. That's just a common knowledge and a common piece of advice coming from a competitive player of 12 years. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next time. See you later.